Yizkor has a very interesting history. As it exists today, and for quite some time, it's a way to pause, recall together losses we've experienced over the years. You know, in the Book of Remembrance, many of us will put the names of those we've lost, and every few years or every once in a while, the list grows. And so we become more and more aware of the passing of the years. Family shrinks, family grows. So although we stand as a community, the individual Yizkor prayers we recite focus on our individual laws. In the middle of Yizkor, we get silent as a community and privately recite our Yizkor prayers for our loved ones, for our friends. So there are people who have suffered a loss very recently, or perhaps decades ago. Connecting it to the holidays was both psychological and practical. Psychology is clear. We miss our loved ones most around the holidays, because holidays were times that we gathered and celebrated, and we can vividly remember those great moments and events. Life cycle occasions are also times we most miss our friends and relatives. And there are moments during those occasions as well that lend themselves to remembering in some form or fashion. Sephardim will actually recite a memorial prayer right under the chuppah during the wedding for a mother or father who didn't live to see the marriage. Ashkenazim usually don't recite the memorial prayer then, but they might do it privately in the office before they begin the wedding, or make a reference to those who didn't live to see the simcha. So before a holiday ends, last day of Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, meaning Shemini Atzeret, and the end of the days of repentance, Yom Kippur, we stop and we say Yizkor. It's consoling, it's life-affirming, but as you all are aware, we also recite together memorial prayers for the victims of the Shoah. It's right in the Yizkor service. And memorial prayers for Israelis and Israeli soldiers who've been killed in defense of the state or victimized by terrorists. This war in Gaza and Lebanon has both elements: soldiers who have been killed and close to 1,200 civilians killed on October 7th. Hostages still languishing in the hellhole called Gaza. The origins of Yizkor. It wasn't for personal remembrances, actually. It didn't begin that way. There were yurt sites for that, and visitations to the cemetery on certain times of the year. The origins of Yizkor are actually the Crusades at the end of the 11th century. The Crusades were directed, as we know, against the Muslims who conquered the Holy Land, and an effort to liberate the Holy Land and return it to Christendom. That was the purpose of the Crusades. But on the way, if you can picture the map, coming from France, from Western Europe and getting to Jerusalem, you have to go through Europe and parts of Eastern Europe. So as the Crusaders encountered many Jewish towns and villages, they decided they had the opportunity to avenge Jesus' death by killing Jews, as if they really needed an excuse to kill, pillage, and rape Jews. The results of the Crusades for the Jewish community were devastating. We actually don't have any accurate statistics because we don't even know what the population of the world was, let alone what the population of the Jewish world was. And records, of course, either poorly kept or completely destroyed. But we do know this. Entire towns, entire villages were completely decimated. wiped out, disappeared from the face of the earth. They ceased to exist. Now, since families in that period of time tended to live all together in the same town, they were born there, they died in the same town, and all the cousins, everybody was connected. Everybody lived in the same town. So we saw the destruction of entire families, like later on in the Holocaust, but on a much grander scale. The shock to the Jewish people, to the Jewish psyche, cannot be overstated. Entire families, entire villages, gone. No remnants whatsoever. So the painful question arose, who will mourn for these people? Who will say Kaddish? There's not a single family member left to remember them, to say Kaddish for them. How will their yurtzites be observed? And so Yizkor came into being. As we sadly know, this has repeated itself many times in Jewish history, culminating, of course, in the worst destruction, the Shoah. Entire families, entire towns, entire communities, gone. You go to Treblinka, they can't put names of people. Wouldn't even be possible. So they have stones. And the stone, it doesn't represent a family. The stone represents an entire village wiped off the face of the earth. So we established a special day on the calendar called Yom HaShoah. But we still include it in the Yizkor prayers. Today's Yizkor is literally the anniversary on the Jewish calendar of October 7th. It was early this morning, a year ago, on the Jewish calendar, that the attack was launched. People in Israel and around the world, many were in synagogue, first reciting Yizkor prayers, because of Shemini Atzeret, but then they transitioned immediately to Simchas Torah, because remember in Israel, Shemini Atzeret and Simchas Torah are the same day. They don't have another day designated separate for Simchas Torah. We were in Israel at that time. We were in our son's shul in Zichron Yaakov, and we see strange things. As the service progressed, we saw people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, some of them doctors. You're always used to one person walking out of services to check their phone because they got beeped, right? You're used to that. But it wasn't one. Then it was two. Then it was three. And you looked and you saw worrisome faces. We didn't know what was going on. Slowly the word started to spread. These people never came back in. They left immediately. So we knew there was something serious going on. They were being called up, obviously. There were doctors, particularly needed immediately, and reservists. Services were cut very short. People went home in groups, as instructed by the officials. But the full brunt of what had happened and was still happening wasn't really felt until later in the day. We don't need to recount what happened on that tragic day. A day far more powerful in terms of losses for Israel than 9/11 was here. Because to parallel the devastation of October 7th, that had to be over 40,000 Americans and others in those buildings and on those planes killed on 9/11. Imagine if 40,000 Americans had been killed on 9/11, you can be sure that Afghanistan would have basically ceased to exist. It would have been literally flattened. Those who demonstrated in celebration of that day, people in Gaza, people in the West Bank, other places in the world, would have lived in infamy for many lifetimes and would have incurred the wrath of America, its people, and all of Western civilization. At the community memorial for October 7th, which was held on Miami Beach, Temple Beth Shalom, we heard testimony from an Israeli who spoke of the family of his niece, nephew, and their 3 teenage children. Not one survived. The family does not exist anymore. Wiped off the face of the earth. and other families were completely destroyed. October 7th had so many parallels to the destructiveness of the Crusades, the unbelievable violence, the cruelty, the slaughter of children, women, elderly, massive rape. The difference, of course, is that no one came to the aid of the Jews during the Crusades. Today, there is an Israeli army that not only put an end to the slaughter, but is bringing the criminals who perpetrated it to justice and will destroy, neutralize the forces that launched those pogroms. All the leaders of those terror groups have been eliminated in less than 1 year. And all the new ones will face the same fate if they don't surrender the hostages and end their rule in Gaza and Lebanon. Another difference, of course, is that we have a Jewish state to remember them, to take care of the survivors, to create memorials, to perpetuate their memories. But we can't forget. We need to remember, and Yizkor fills that role for us today and every time we recite it. The question arises, how can we balance memorials for our loved ones and our friends with remembering tragedies like the Holocaust and October 7th? We personally have suffered losses, but they pale in comparison to these tragedies. And the rabbis understood this. But they also understood that the family, the immediate community, is the building block of our lives and of our people. So by acknowledging our own losses and sadness, we can relate better to the profound losses we have suffered as a people, as a nation. So we start with ourselves, our own families, parents, grandparents, relatives, good friends. And then we go to the larger family, the family of the Jewish people. We need to connect to our families and our immediate communities before we can connect to our nation. The family and the communities, the building blocks of the nation. One more dichotomy that this first anniversary of October 7th and every future one presents to us. This holiday has Yizkor, and then it has the tremendous joy of Simchas Torah. Dancing, singing, pure joy that we have once again finished reading our Torah and beginning it again. There's no more joyous celebration than Simchas Torah on the calendar. So how do you mourn the October 7th tragedy and celebrate Simchas Torah on the very same day? How do you do that? During the holiday of Sukkot, we studied the book of Kohelet. That's where you have those famous lines, a time to live, a time to die, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. Now, it appears that Kohelet is telling us sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, sometimes we mourn, sometimes we dance. It seems departmentalized. A time for this, a time for that. Different times, different emotions. But there is another possibility for understanding Kohelet. Our daughter Dahlia, who read Kohelet in her synagogue for them, found a commentator who said, there's another way to approach Kohelet. Perhaps he is saying, sometimes you have to do both at the same time. Sometimes the two emotions strike you at the same time. There's a wedding, but one of the parents or grandparents died that week. There is mourning, there is joy. October 7th is one of those days. We will mourn that tragic day and the horrendous loss of life, the unspeakable violence and suffering. But we will also celebrate the symbol of our eternity, our Torah. We will celebrate that we now have a state of Israel and a Jewish army to fight back, to protect us. And that we have allies who put their own jets and their own pilots in the air in jeopardy to protect Israel from Iranian missile attacks. And that we have a committed diaspora community that is speaking up and standing up for Israel and fights back against the Israeli and Jew haters that have raised their ugly heads. And that we have an American community which stands by Israel at a rate of 75% and even higher when it comes to Israel's right to self-defense. And we have a Congress which votes at a 97% rate to supply the best weapons so Israel can protect her citizens. So we mourn and we celebrate at the same time. That's what Kehelet was telling us. Sometimes the emotions are in you at the very same moment. Sometimes we have to mourn and celebrate and give thanks in the very same 24-hour period. That's the reality of the post-October 7th Shemini Atzeret Simchas Torah holiday. So we will now rise to first remember our family friends, and then to remember the victims of Jew hatred from the Crusades to the Holocaust to October 7th. And then we will come back tonight and dance with the Torahs. 6 times we will circle the room with music and joy. And on the 7th, we will circle in silence in memory of those who cannot sing and dance with the Torah because of October 7th. But in their names, we will build a stronger and more committed Jewish community, preserve that which they believed in and that which they died for.